masking fluid. Whether you love it or hate it, it's a valuable tool for us watercolour painters. I painted this heron this week, and I had a lot of people message me and ask me how I painted the white feathers. In this video, I'll show you how, and I'll give you a few tips about using masking fluid at the end of the video. When I paint with watercolour, one of the first things I have to do is decide exactly where I need to preserve the white areas, because they're the areas that I don't put any paint on. It's the white of the paper that becomes the white parts on the painting. Sometimes I'll use masking fluid to help me preserve the white areas of the paper. Masking fluid is a liquid latex-based product that you can paint onto the paper to protect it from the paint. I use it when I want to paint a loose, splashy background on quickly and I don't want to get any paint on my subject. I'll put it around the edge of the subject and then I can feel confident to let loose with the paint without any fear of getting paint where I don't want it. So here on this mouse painting that I did a week or two ago, I've masked the edges of the poppy seed heads and I've masked the edge of the mouse and the mouse's foot. You can see I'm using my big brush to paint around everything because I've got the masking fluid on the edge of those things. I'm not worried about getting paint on them. I also use it on fiddly bits of a painting, like on the stamens on a flower, or on the highlights in an animal's eye, or on spiky white heron feathers. You might remember a few weeks ago I painted a Carolina wren and I did a study in my watercolour journal. On this study I put some masking fluid on before I painted it, and the areas where I put the masking fluid on didn't turn out the way I wanted them to. So when I painted the main painting of the wren, I didn't put the masking fluid on and everything worked out okay. On this heron painting, I did the opposite. I painted a study before I painted the main painting, and on the study, I didn't mask off those spiky white feathers. I thought that I'd be able to paint carefully around them with my brush, and I feel that because I did that, that area of the painting looks overworked. So I find that on some paintings, masking fluid works well, and on others, not so much. Let me quickly show you what I did wrong on the study of the heron. So this is the study that I did before I painted the main painting. I didn't bother masking off those spiky white feathers at the front. I thought it would be simple enough to paint around them. So I'm just using my brush now and some grey paint that I mixed up, and I'm painting the areas in between the feathers. I thought if I'm careful enough, I should be right. So I'm painting the area around each feather, and I'm leaving the white of the paper showing on the feather itself. Then I left all of that to dry and I painted some more washes all over the bird. So then I came back to these feathers at the front and I felt that I need to darken the area behind them or the space around them. So I'm painting another layer of my grey paint there. So these feathers at the front ended up looking stiff and overworked, and they also took me longer to do. So those feathers on that area of the study I wasn't happy with, and that made me realise that when I paint the main painting, I would be better off painting in those feathers with the masking fluid and then washing in a really quick loose wash over the top of them to add colour to those spaces that are around them. So I'll show you what I did there. I'll also show you how I masked off the edges of the heron so that I could paint my washy, splashy background. And I'll also show you how I used the masking fluid on the feathers on the back of the heron. Okay, so now I'm working on the main painting. This is after I've done my study. I've realised my mistakes and I've decided to paint these white feathers in some masking fluid. This is Schminky masking fluid that I'm using. The paintbrush that I'm using is an older, small, synthetic round brush that I don't use very often. It's a good idea to use old brushes when you use masking fluid, or designate some specific brushes that you have that aren't too expensive. Tag them and use them only for masking fluid. Masking fluid will ruin your brush if you let it dry on it. So you can't put your brush down and go and answer the phone or go and make yourself a coffee, because when you come back, it will more than likely have hardened in your brush and you won't get it out. Some people like to wet their brush with some water and then wipe it over some soap before they use the masking fluid, and that can help to stop it from drying hard in the brush. Okay, I've got the masking fluid all over the top of those thicker white feathers. Now I'm going to use a thinner brush, a liner brush, to start painting some finer ones. So here you can see the masking fluid on the paper. You can see what I've done. So that's got to dry now before I put some paint on there. I'll leave them to dry and I'll use this flat brush now to start painting around the edge of the heron. I want to paint on a splashy, loose, washy background, and I don't want to risk getting any paint on these white feathers, so I'll use it to protect the feathers. That way I can relax when I put my wash on the background. So here you can see all the areas that I've got the masking fluid on. Sorry about my wobbly photography there. So the first thing I did was paint the wash on the background. Now, because these areas are masked, I'm not so worried about getting the paint on there. Some of the areas I didn't mask because I thought I'd be right with the brush. This is Payne's Grey that I'm using. I'm trying to get it on there as quickly as I can. Obviously, I've sped this video up, but I was working pretty fast. I put some water on there to create some watercolour blooms. And I kept going around the front. I didn't mask off the beak, but I probably should have. Now I'm getting down to this masked area. You can see I can paint straight over those feathers that are masked, and the foot as well, because I put masking fluid on it. I can paint over the tail feathers and over the top of the legs quite easily, without worrying about getting paint on there. And that's what it looked like after it had dried. On the areas where I didn't need the masking fluid anymore, I used my finger to take it off. So back to these spiky feathers at the front now. I've still got the masking fluid there, so I can put some paint straight on there like I did with the background. And I don't have to worry about painting around them like I was on my study. What I need to make sure is that the colour's dark enough, because I don't really want to have to come back and paint in between them, because that would have defeated the purpose of putting the masking fluid on there. So when it's dry, I take the masking fluid off again. Some people will use a rubber cement pickup tool to take off the masking fluid. I don't have one, so I just use my fingers. Sometimes I'll use my eraser and that gets it off as well. So there's my spiky white feathers without having to fuss too much. Now there's some more spiky feathers on the back of the heron, but the feathers at the back here are not as light as the feathers on the front. So I'm painting a layer of grey paint over the top, and then I'll dry it off and I'll put my masking fluid over the top of this layer of paint. That area is dry now, so I can come back with my masking fluid, my old brush, and start to paint these wispy feathers in here. This masking fluid that I'm using is white. You can buy some tinted masking fluid, which is a light colour, and that allows you to see what you're doing better. I'll show you the masking fluid on the paper again so you can see what I've done. So there it is there. So that's dry now and it's ready for me to put some paint over the top. So now I've got a darker bluey grey colour here. This is French ultramarine that I've mixed some burnt sienna into. So that gets some colour around all those feathers so that you'll be able to see them. So I'm going to soften away that paint line there with a damp brush. That gets rid of those hard paint edges. So my brush is just damp with a bit of water, and that takes the hard paint edges away. Watercolour paint always dries lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. So I'm putting a bit more colour there to make sure that it will be dark enough for what I want. And then I wait for the paint to dry and I can take that masking fluid off now and reveal those spiky feathers. So then I come back with a bit more of that grey paint that I mixed up, the bluey grey paint, and I paint some feathers over the top. I run it down the back just to give it a softer ridge there. Down here I didn't bother masking this little patch of white feathers. All I did was paint the Payne's Grey paint around it. Once I've got the Payne's Grey where I want it, I come back with some darker pigment over the top. I could have masked that section off with some masking fluid, but I didn't think it was necessary. Towards the end of the painting, I used some white gouache to add some length to some of the white feathers. Gouache is an opaque watercolour paint. It comes in different colours. This colour is Permanent White by Winsor & Newton. I added a few more crossing over them here and there. I didn't put a lot of the gouache on because whenever I get a bit carried away with it, I tend to overwork the painting. So I'm just lengthening some of them. I wanted the gouache to soften this area and make the feathers look a little less stiff. So I was very selective where I put it. So after all that, I came back and I did a bit more work on the background, and then I was finished. I stood back and had a look at it and decided to call it a day. So masking fluid's a really handy tool to use. I'm going to make a full-length tutorial of this heron painting and I'll put it on my Patreon site. It'll be available in a month or so when I finish it. It takes me a while to edit the videos and get the voiceover done. Okay, I just want to quickly repeat some of the tips that I mentioned earlier. Use old brushes to put masking fluid on because if it dries in your brush, you might as well throw it away. Sometimes wetting your brush with some water and then rubbing it over some soap before you use it can help to protect it. Masking fluid gets old. Don't use it if you've had it sitting in the drawer for years. I did once with this masking fluid and it discoloured the paper and it ruined my painting. Don't leave it on the paper too long or you might have difficulty getting it off. About 24 hours is as long as I'll ever leave it. Test masking fluid on the paper somewhere before you use it. You want to make sure that your paper's not too delicate or you might tear it or discolour it. that's about all I can think of at the moment. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like and hit the subscribe button. And I will see you next week with some new watercolour creation that I've whipped up. I'll see you soon. Masking fluid. I'm looking at myself. In this video, I'll show you how I did that, and I'll give you a few tips. On this painting of the heron, I did the opposite. I painted a study of the heron before I painted the main painting, and on the stunny, you might remember a few weeks ago I painted a Carolina wren, and I did a study in my watercolour journal. On this study, I put some masking fluid on before I painted in the areas where I put the masking fluid on. Louise. That's about all I can think of at the moment. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the videos. Oh, the videos. It's only one video.